All right, so it's Sunday, and that means it's time for us to recap and get some analysis on the key stories of the week that was, from the budget that didn't happen to the return of stage 6 load shedding. So much to discuss. Let's get into it. And joining us in studio is political analyst Dr Ongama Mtimka and international relations expert Dr Oscar van Heerden. Gentlemen, a good evening to you. Happy Sunday evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Good evening to you.
I actually, before we start getting into the local issues, Dr. van Heerden, I actually think it's important for us to start with some of the international issues. And I was hoping that we could also speak to William Bird, and we'll try and get him on the line from Media Monitoring Africa, because I think that as we get ready for the G20 year and the activities to build up, so many eyes on us. And I think immediately about what you make of how the international community views our week that was. We're hosting foreign ministers in a week where we have no budget that takes place, and then stage 6 load shedding. I mean, are those things that are top of mind for you as the world looks at us?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think the very last thing, everyone knows that there's always dynamics with politics. So the issue around the G20 and not wanting to take photos and so on and so forth, that's understandable. I think the big headache now in Pretoria is the fact that suddenly there was load shedding stage 6 in the middle of the G20. You know, we can be fortunate that it was soon after or immediately after the ministers' meeting. But the truth of the matter is the embassies and everyone else, the world now knows. And the question on everyone's minds is, can they host this?
What's the message that it sends? I mean, this is the issue around the stability of our country and how it's viewed from a global point of view, even if it's just the political stability. When you've got the world watching as the lights go off, and then also political parties saying that, well, actually, the postponement of the budget was our idea. I mean, it's quite the play that's, you know, that the world is seeing here.
Yeah, so South Africa has overcome, because remember, these are investor countries in South Africa, especially the European Union, that has pledged its support almost in a very political way to say to Washington, we still value some of the countries that you want to ostracize. So initially, I think the message around South Africa in power would have been Pretoria has got its act together as far as the energy security issue. And I think the message would be maybe not, you know, and that doesn't bode well for us.
Yeah, we've also got a very outspoken president as we see the first G20 meeting, take place. And one of the things that he's talked about is, of course, the lack of participation of the United States of America. I mean, it's really difficult to ignore. The president essentially saying that he does not view this as a boycott. Is he correct? Is he playing politics?
It's not so much playing politics. I think he's trying to save face, because at the end of the day, the big players are not in the room. Marco Rubio is not here. The Secretary of Finance is saying he's not coming to Cape Town. This is big. The fact that they are sending, and I know the South African government is saying senior diplomats, but we all know that it's a junior diplomat from the embassy here in Pretoria. I think the important thing, Naledi, is that there's at least a willingness on the part of the Americans to say we need to have someone in the room. And I think that's at least something positive. They're not instructing the embassy to say, don't even worry about this. They're saying, look, we know the world is watching. We are trying to make a point by boycotting this, but we should have someone in the room in case there's things that are being said that concerns us internationally and so forth. So I think that is a small positive. And I think that the president is in a bit of a corner, because at the end of the day, they are going to have to explore trying to get an audience with the State Department, with Marco Rubio, if not with President Trump, if anything, to just explain that these decisions are really based on misinformation and false narratives. But I don't think that's really what Washington is interested in. I think that the issue of the land expropriation is a distant second issue. What's uppermost is that you are dealing with people that are in Washington, Trump, and people around him that are very supportive of the State of Israel. And they have a problem with the fact that South Africa has taken Israel to the ICJ. And at the end of the day, I think that when the door is opened, and it will be opened, they are just playing hardball for now to make us sweat. But when they do open the door, I think Trump and the people around him are going to tell us their true intentions and say, you need to do something about this ICJ case.
Yeah, what I think is quite interesting though is that in that meeting you would have the DIRCO minister in the room, and you say at the heart of this is the ICJ matter that South Africa takes up, and who was there at The Hague? It was Minister Ronald Lamola, so he's in a very difficult position himself.
He is. So here's the thing. This is a game that Washington has played, especially during the time of the Cold War, coercive diplomacy, where it gets countries to fall in line. And this is the game that is actually being played here. What I hope happens is that, notwithstanding the cries that are being made, even within our country, for South Africa to drop that case, that in fact they continue. Because you see, the greatest criticism when conducts like this, such as alleged genocide, happen, they should come from friends. They should come from people who care about a rules-based international order. Israel has every right to defend itself against what it perceives as threats, such as the October 7 invasion, or you could call it a liberation, a struggle, if you like. But it doesn't have a right to do so in ways that contravene international law. So you wage a war, but do not genocide people, do not bomb civilians, target the terrorists, which is somebody else's liberation fighter, but there's a reason why there's a regime of international law and rules. It's meant to protect against, ethnic cleansing among us. So my hope is that Pretoria doesn't back down, that Israel explains itself at the International Court of Justice, and in fact, where it has been erroneous, it actually takes corrective action. And that's not about waging war. You know?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
The thing is, Ongama, that ship has sailed. You see, I hear people talking of dropping the case. That South Africa can't do that. One, not because it doesn't want to. They've already put the case in front of the ICJ. And remember, there are other countries that have joined. Ireland is one of those. Interestingly, Ireland is not being targeted, perhaps because there's serious big tech, United States big tech companies in Ireland. So I think that ship has sailed. This is clearly targeting South Africa. And I think someone, and we must be honest, someone asked the question in Washington, why is South Africa hands off? Why is South Africa not like any other African country? And the answer was, actually it is like any other African countries, and we should deal with it. That exceptionalism is not there with the Trump administration. And I think that's what the South African government need to wrap their heads around. It's going to be a very difficult thing. We don't have to pretend. The direction that the Trump administration is taking is already suggesting that they are going to drop South Africa from AGOA. It's as clear as daylight. And we need to begin to think, what is the alternatives? What is the plan?
So look at what we've picked up, and of course, this was also an interesting talking point over the past few days. 2 days ago, the president tweets this. Let's bring this up on the screen, and this is, of course, to also bring up the point that you're making, Dr. Van Heerden, about what he does next, right? He essentially, and we'll bring up that X in a moment, but in that X, the president essentially invites Volodymyr Zelensky to South Africa. He says, I welcome the constructive engagement I had with President Zelensky, and I look forward to hosting him in South Africa soon for a state visit. We both agreed on the urgent need for an inclusive peace process that involves all parties and finding a resolution to the conflict and securing a lasting peace. South Africa remains committed to supporting the dialogue process between Russia and the Ukraine. Is that good global chess there that you see?
Absolutely. I mean, my interpretation of that is the Ramaphosa administration sending a clear message to Washington saying, you might want to ignore us, you might want to put sanction on us, but we remain a player. There was an African peace delegation that went. We met with Zelensky. We do have the ear of Putin. We know that you are talking to Putin, but we also have the ear of Putin. And we know that Putin has said very clearly that this is not a war against the Ukrainian people. This is not, it's not about punishing the Ukrainians. They've always been part of us as Russia. And so I think that what Ramaphosa is doing is to say, let me hear Zelensky's side of the story. He obviously has concerns for his own citizens in terms of security guarantees, in terms of rebuilding the country, and so on and so forth. Things that the Trump administration might want to ignore for now. But I think after the state visit with Zelensky, the next step is for Ramaphosa to meet with Putin and say, look, this is what Zelensky is saying the Ukrainian people want. How do we manage that part of things? Because it's still within the framework of international law and the respect for territorial integrity and all of those things.
Yeah.
So I think it's a very clever move by the Pretoria government.
You want to come in, Dr. Mtimka? Can we move the needle?
So what's interesting for me is South Africa and how Russia sees the move, right? And what Pretoria thinks Russia sees it as. And if this is not something that they sanctioned, which I doubt they would have, it's interesting how it's showing how self-assertive it is in terms of South Africa's gambit in this whole process. Because yes, indeed, it's sending a message to Washington. I don't know to what extent it's sending a message to Russia, and or how Russia interprets it. But I think that there would be a diplomatic issue. They may not want to play it out in public, or in fact, there would be a mending of a clarification of roles. But it's a very interesting, it's one of those moves in chess you would call it's dubious, because it's asserting, it's asserting a particular position by the posture that it is assuming. It's interesting. It would be interesting whether St. Petersburg sees it.
Go ahead. Just to add to that, what I'm seeing here is that everyone knows that the European Union and its leaders are not honest brokers in this situation. You saw they don't even want to take a photo with Lavrov at the G20. They clearly don't want to be at the table with Russia. That is a gap for South Africa, because South Africa is not a direct party to this conflict. It's seen as an honest broker. And let's ask the question, when the European Unions and Zelensky, of course, clamors and say, we should be at that table, why are you only talking to Putin? It's because they're not honest brokers. They've got too much vested. Ramaphosa comes in, steps in and says to Zelensky, and Zelensky immediately saw it. And took the offer. I'm coming to Pretoria because here is someone that I know will have the ear of Putin. So I can put things on the table. He's going to go and meet with Putin, something the Europeans don't want to do. Remember, this is tit for tat. I'm surprised that they are so upset that they are not at the negotiating table when they had numerous peace talks without Russia, excluding Russia. I mean, I don't know how they thought they were going to get peace. And
without
now,
having a party there.
Precisely. Now it's the taste of the same, and they are so upset about it now. But, just to say, the Putin-Trump or the two governments meeting is not about only Ukraine. This is the thing that I think a lot of people are missing. The United States is meeting with Russia to normalize diplomatic relations. Amongst other things, one of the issues on the agenda is Ukraine. And it's not even top of the agenda as far as Trump is concerned. We saw the four things that they immediately agreed on was nothing to do with Ukraine, actually. It was about normalizing the embassies in Washington and Moscow. It was about economic relations. And Trump on the sidelines, just adding a bit of pressure as he is the disruptor-in-chief, saying, I think we should invite Russia back into the G7. And it must become the G8 again. I wouldn't be surprised now if he's going to say to the Europeans, it's time that Russia must be part of NATO.
If we're not careful, we can get so stuck in the international sort of activities, because there's so much going on, and it really is interesting to see South Africa right in the center of a lot of it. But we're going to take your calls as well. Some of the stories that stood out for you in the week that was 010-594-6010, or send us a WhatsApp on 072-110-5584. Always looking forward to getting some of your insights. I mean, one of the things that we know we're going to be hearing about from our viewers is their frustration over stage 6 load shedding, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But this is a democracy that this year is turning 31 years old, and for the first time in our democracy, the budget speech was not presented. And not only was it not presented, you've got the political parties going back and forth around whose idea it was really to have it postponed. But then there was this particular moment, and I want to take you back to it, right? You'd remember that after the budget postponement. There was that press briefing that was led by the finance minister, and he was, of course, alongside Minister in the Presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni. And they held the press briefing, and I mean, a lot of people were talking about this. For a moment, they forgot that the cameras were still rolling, and the microphones were still right there at the table. Watch this.
I'm glad you took the question about the commissioner. You answered it much better than I would have been able to.
Oh no, I was a bit. I was worried I should not be angry.
Nobody did one. Nobody did one. Yeah. No, you did one.
He's making me angry.
Yes, no.
I said we're discussing. Even here, he comes up with this rubbish. I said, how will it help me on the 19th, even now on the 12th? He did not know that we made provision for him for 3.5 in the new arrangement. But that 3.5 now is gone.
Yes, no, all right, you finally keep it. What happened
Yeah, gives you a window as to, you know, what our leaders actually sound like when they're not front-facing. But your concerns about that particular moment, because as we can chuckle about, you know, how interesting it is as the window in, one supposes, but it does speak to a concerning rift between the SARS commissioner and the finance minister and what that looks like just for the public.
Yeah, so that's just unfortunate and unprofessional. These are, for me, the personal nature of the question from Minister Khumbudzo Ntshavheni is what is concerning. But differences between a finance minister and a commissioner, I think are understandable. These processes of budgeting are strenuous, and the finance minister is playing a very tough balancing act here. So I expect those not to be, you know, you treat each other with kid gloves.
Sure, yeah.
But it's good to see that there's from an institution, from a politics of the strength of institutions, that the commissioner represents the interests of the revenue as a commission.
Yeah, well, look, there's a lot more to discuss as that, of course, continues to unfold and we get closer and closer to that budget actually being presented then on the 12th of March. But thank you so much to Dr. Ongama Mtimka. I know that you need to leave us. We'll continue with Dr. Van Heerden and we'll be joined by William Bird as well of Media Monitoring Africa on the other side of this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. We continue to, of course, look at the top stories from the week that was here on Newsfeed PM. And I'm still in conversation with Dr. Oscar Van Heerden. And we also are joined now by William Bird, who is with Media Monitoring Africa. William, a good evening to you. Thank you for joining us. You know, just before we went into that break there, we were, of course, talking about I suppose the tension that we seem to be, you know, seeing brewing between the finance minister and the SARS commissioner, but also this matter of the budget postponement. I mean, is something that I don't think anybody was expecting, but standout moments for you where that is concerned, Doctor.
Yeah, you know, I think I agree with Ongama that it's unfortunate, it's very sad, especially because here you have a SARS commissioner that really had to lift SARS as an institution out of having been hollowed out during the Zuma administration and bring it back to its former glory and, of course, also give us the kind of deliverables that he has managed over the years, unbelievable returns on our taxes. So I think it's very unfortunate there's that kind of rift. And I do also want to say, Naledi, that, you know, this is a lesson also for the ANC leadership, which is that having been technically a majority governing party for so long, this is a clear indication that the rules need to change. You need to approach things differently. How you do things in the past is not going to fly. And I'll give you an example. With the budget process, there's two things that needs to be discussed by the parties, the cabinet and so on, and it's expenditure and tax. Expenditure is always open to everyone. Everyone participates, but tax is very secretive. Tax is a matter between Treasury, the minister and the president. And here, they followed that same cue, revealed the 2% hike, among others, at the very last minute. And of course, there was backlash. There was a blowback from ANC ministers themselves as well in that cabinet, not only as the DA claims from them. Yeah. I'm sure you know that Gayton McKenzie went outside of the purview and informed the country about what actually happened in that meeting. And I think that it's clear that we are in the period of coalition politics. This is the future, and therefore the rules of engagement, even on the budget, needs to change.
Yeah. You know, you talk about Gated McKenzie and what he did, and in fact, it wasn't just him. I think it was also Patricia de Lille of the Good Party in the National Assembly sitting, if you will, essentially saying that the agreement to postpone, and William, I'm bringing this to you now, the agreement to postpone the budget was not just a DA decision. You know, Patricia de Lille goes on to list the parties that agreed to this. And I think immediately about how the DA had that poster that said, you know, the budget is postponed, and there was that backlash. I'm interested in how you feel, you know, sort of the story has been told. You do a lot of the media coverage. And if there's, you know, a clear understanding that there is some consensus within this GNU where a lot of the parties involved are concerned.
You know, I don't think there is that much consensus, to be perfectly frank. I think that, you know, parties are going to come out and try and spin this in a way that favours them and makes them look best. And all of them are trying to make the best of a rather and profoundly unfortunate situation. You know, this budget speech came on the day before they were due to have the first foreign finance ministers meeting of the G20 in Johannesburg. So the timing for it really couldn't have been any worse. And then you've got all of these parties, you know, each of them trying to claim their element of glory. And I guess the key thing is for ordinary members of the public to get a sense of what actually went on, why the decision was taken, and what's being done to remedy this. You know, what we have to hope is that future discussions, that we then taken into the confidence of what decisions are going to be made. You know, your previous guest has said that, you know, the rules have to change, and he's completely correct. I think, you know, the rules for all of these things are going to have to change. We're finding out new things. You know, if you look at the political landscape on a global level, we're seeing massive changes around the world in terms of how things are operating, and it's important that we stick to our guns as an emerging democracy. You said with 31 years, that's a significant milestone for us. We need to maintain our issues of openness, transparency, and accountability, because if we don't, you know, then there's not much of a democracy worth fighting for.
Yeah, I wonder if an opportunity was missed here even before the budget to have a discussion around, William, and I'm talking now about on public platforms, to really debate what needs to be done before this budget. And I'll explain why. You've got, of course, this idea that this proposal of a VAT increase was to deal with shortfalls in education and certainly in social spending. Perhaps if you have more of an open discussion, you might get some buy-in. Would that have helped?
Look, I think that, to be perfectly honest, our government doesn't communicate what it does nearly effectively enough. I think that there are a whole lot of things that do occur behind the scenes that we have no idea or very little idea about. Our media are increasingly under-resourced, and their ability to give and do a proper unpacking of these things. You know, we're waiting for the budget speech to have occurred before you then had, you know, all of our news organizations had analysts lined up to help unpack and you know, help people understand what the budget was about, but not very much about going in. And where I think you're completely correct is that in a democracy, it's not just about political leaders telling us what's what. It is very much about members of the public participating, using whatever opportunities they can to participate in that democracy. And so I think, you know, there needs to be a far greater participation of the public to build that level of buy-in, because at the moment, as things stand, I don't think that there's very high levels of trust in the way that you know, government spends their money. Certainly, if you live in Johannesburg, you wonder quite how they manage to waste so much money and still not get anything functioning effectively. So I think that if you expand that level of trust and look at that and that deterioration of trust, this doesn't just impact the way that our media report it, because of course they were also caught flat-footed on that. When you undermine trust, it doesn't just undermine the state, it undermines media, it undermines all of our democratic elements as they are. We've seen exactly that with an effort to get people to be uncertain about, well, is this new Land Expropriation Act really some kind of a guise to, kick white Afrikaners off their land, or is there something else going on there? And the moment you create that doubt, you give people less reason to know what to do, how to act, and critically you undermine trust in those entities. And the best way of building that back, communicate. So we need for them to be coming and saying to us, right, our new plan is going to look like this. We're looking at these 1, 2, 3, 4 options. The parties are going to come together because they're representative of these voters, etc., and they're going to decide on these and these issues and make sure that they take the public with them. That'll help build a lot of trust. If they come out with some kind of something that doesn't make a lot of sense and the parties are all then trying to put their spin on it, as members of the public, we're going to be thinking, well, who did a deal and is this really going to benefit everyone?
Yeah, we're obviously taking some WhatsApps. You can send them to us on 072-110-5584 just to get your thoughts on some of the big stories of the week. 072-110-5584. You're more than welcome to give us a call as well. 010-594-6010. Maybe let's take a look at one or two of those WhatsApps that have come in. Mpo Mokato says, hi Naledi, the failure to deliver the budget and load shedding's return needs South African government to manage the economy and also act in a manner that will give back confidence to foreign investors. Mpo, thank you so much for that. Let's see, one more. Zakele says, hi, I think there is more that needs to be done to improve our electricity issues. They just must be honest with us. Okay, Zakele. I want to bring you back to a little bit earlier, William, a conversation that Dr. Van Heerden and Dr. Mtimka and I were having earlier about some of the international sort of activities that are going on, South Africa's role in all of it. And one of the things that pops up for me is now disinformation, misinformation, such an issue right now. And I wonder if South Africa's doing enough to really deal with the public narrative as it continues to grow around South Africa's land expropriation and its relationship with, white Afrikaners and all of that. But also the fact that there is so much discussion that is happening at very high level across the ocean taking place on X, William.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that the thing for any member of the public to think about is why this particular issue? Well, for one reason, it's fairly obvious. It's because it's divisive. It picks on issues that are difficult, that are highly emotionally charged, and that have certainly more than a grain of truth and reality to them. Land restitution, the land question in South Africa is one of our big challenges that we have to address in this country. So this is a deliberate move. If you want to attack the South African government on rights-based violations, surely you would go and say, well, the fact that we have children starving in the Eastern Cape, that's possibly one of the most egregious rights-based violations that's occurring. Our pandemic levels of gender-based violence, that's equally an abhorrent and egregious rights-based set of violations. But they didn't. They've chosen this particular element precisely because it seeks to divide, it seeks to polarize, and there's enough of an element of truth there for people to go, well, is it real, is it not? And the moment you've got that, you've got a perfect vehicle for your element of mis or disinformation. If you think back to the WMC, the White Monopoly Capital moniker that was used and developed under the Guptas, it was again a tactic to divide, disparage, and to distract people from the other issues that were really going on. So when you look at that, then you say, well, what is really going on here? Because I think that to their credit, certainly the government's response to this has been to say, well, there isn't. People are very welcome to read the law. Here it is. This is misinformation. I think we then need to be challenging our local US embassy about, well, you live here. What are the missives that you're sending back to your government saying? And are you telling them the truth? Are you giving them this evidence? If you've got evidence that we don't have, please share it with us, right? So I think that's part of the way that they need to deal with it. And then we need to be looking at saying, well, what are the elements that are actually really up for negotiation and up for debate there in terms of why America may well be taking such a strong opposition stance. And one of them we know happens to be that we're hosting the G20. This is the last opportunity a developing nation is going to be hosting this prestigious set of events and meetings and helping to set and frame the guidelines for the next one, which is then to be hosted in the USA. So there's quite possibly an element of driving us away from that. And then, of course, there's the ICJ case. So when you want to look and divide people and undermine credibility of media and of the state, you do it on something that's going to be a highly emotive issue. You can do it where you can get groups mobilized and you can get well-organized campaigns to support that, so that you generate a lot of noise and mess around that, when in fact you are actually looking at things slightly off-center.
Yeah. William, we really do appreciate it. Dr. Van Heerden, what we did as well this weekend is the devastating, devastated families of the 3 soldiers that were laid to rest this weekend. And we've been talking about, what's happening on the globe and South Africa's role in all of that. But there's also what's happening on the continent. And, families obviously grieving. But as you watched some of those funerals, from your expert point of view, really what we need to be saying as South Africa, particularly Angie Motshega, for instance, moving forward about, do we stay in the DRC? We know that we're pulling, she's talked about bringing some of the injured soldiers back home. Do we stay, do we go?
Yeah, just one thing, Naledi, with the previous conversation. I do want to say that it's not the panacea of all the communications problems, but it is a concern that still today we don't have a head of GCIS. I don't understand what's the delay. There's no coordination in terms of a coordinated messaging, and so on and so forth. I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Yeah, that's important.
On the DRC side of things, peace is an expensive business, and it is unfortunately a very it's a difficult business to do peace, and I think that South Africa and some of the SADC countries are in the Eastern DRC because when you allow a volatile situation to get more volatile, it generally impacts negatively on the region and on us as South Africans.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we are there. We obviously don't want to see our men and women coming back in body bags and so forth. It's not what any country wants to see. But in keeping with peacekeeping and peace building, I think it's important that M23 rebels and Rwandan forces and everyone else that is involved in the conflict in Eastern DRC needs to know that when we talk of international law, when we talk of territorial integrity, it applies all over the world, including in our parts of the continent. And I think that it is a very sad situation, but I think you would know, Naledi, that South Africa, from the beginning, in this 31 years, as early as the Mandela presidency, we've been involved in peacekeeping and peace-building operations on the continent. And I think it's a good thing. It's a public good that South Africa can do. It's just unfortunate that we have now had this setback.
Yeah. Well, we could talk for a very long time, but that's all the time we have. We really do appreciate yours joining us in studio. Dr. Oscar van Heerden there speaking to us. He is, of course, an international relations expert. William Bird of Media Monitoring Africa. And a little bit earlier, we also spoke to Dr. Ongama Mtimka, a political analyst. You're still watching Newsfeed PM, the late edition. We've got more news on the other side of this. Stay with us.